Hey everybody, welcome back. It's MJ here with the third and final installment for Rabbet Planes. And this particular video is going to focus mostly on kind of a pseudo-type study. But I have to go ahead and let you know up front that there is no official type study, at least not that I know of, for the Stanley No78. And so I'm going to be doing a fair amount of speculating. And so if speculation is not your thing and you're looking for more of a sure bet, then this video is probably not for you. So call it speculation, call it educated guessing. My sources for my educated guesses are Roger K. Smith's original type study, John Walter's Stanley book, and www.supertool.com. That's Patrick Leach's Blood and Gore. And then, as you can see, we're going to talk about actual examples here. I'll be showing you actual examples. So ready or not, here we go. Here is a Type 1 body. And as you can see, it's got two patent dates in there, both of them for 1883. And then this is the iron from that Type 1. And if I can get the camera to line up right, you can see it's got the two 1883 dates and the 1884 date. So the 1884 date is for Justin Trout's actual patent for the 78 itself. And then the two 1883 dates, one of them is for Christian Bodmar's design and what is considered the convertible seat design. And then the other one is just a reissue of the same patent later that year. And let me just be more specific and say convertible cutter seat design is how it's classified. Oh, and by the way, we are going way in the weeds on this. So if I didn't warn you, now you know. As you can see, if you look really close, you can see the S casting there. So these first few number 78s that rolled off the assembly line were made at what we believe is the Sessions Foundry, which is denoted by the S casting there. And this is what the lever cap looked like. And this is specifically the lever cap screw that would have been installed on an original Type 1. Now, John Walters states that the Type 1s were from 1884 all the way through 1901, and I have to respectfully disagree with that. I don't think that they made these bodies with the patent dates all the way through 1901. I think those patent dates dropped off long before that. And the reason why I say that is because there would be a lot more of those around, a lot more with the double patent date like that of 1883, if they had truly been made for, what is that, 16, 17 years. And I just don't think that that's the case. So if we cross-reference this to Roger Smith's original type study, we know that the bench planes were being made at the Sessions Foundry, and that would be the Type 7 era. And so from 1893 to 1899 is when we would see the bench planes coming out of the Sessions Foundry with the S casting. But I suspect that the next installment of 78s were being made with a B casting, which is what you see here. If you look really close, you can see that B casting right there. And you can see that it's still got the same design on the back as far as the number 78 and then Stanley. All of that's the same. And as a matter of fact, the body is the same. The only difference is got the B casting versus the S. But that's just one example of what I meant by I'm doing some speculating. So if you've had a different experience and maybe you've seen a whole ton of those S casting Type 1 bodies, then by all means, you know, I welcome anybody's input on this. I'm just going by what I've seen in my, call them educated decisions. My best educated guess is that this iron, most likely the J logo, was used all the way up through as far as maybe even 1907. You may have noticed I'm not using the verbiage Type 2, Type 3. We know what we know or what we think we know about Type 1. There is no type study as far as I know, so I'm just speaking in generalities and doing a lot of speculating. We talked about these B casting 78s, and if you get into one, you'll notice that chances are, if it's all correct, it's going to have the B on the back of the lever cap. You should have a B on your fence as well. And as a matter of fact, there should be a B on the back of your, this one doesn't have it, but just so you know, it would be on the back of your depth stop as well, if your plane is 100% correct. Now, I suspect that this particular lever cap screw was used all the way through 1905, but again, speculation on my part. The reason I do say that, though, is because in 1905, they started using this particular lever cap screw on the number 39s, the dedicated dado planes, and that's why I suspect that they made the same switch for the 78s. Our next major change for the bodies was in 1910, and Christian Bodmer was issued another patent regarding the 78, and it had to do with improved construction on the body. And if you look closely, you can see where you've got these additional ridges here. It's beefed up, so it's going to be a lot harder for it to break, i.e. if it falls off the bench. But this is the improved construction that's denoted by that 1910 patent improvement. And another major difference here, we went from this style with the ornate design on the handle to what they call the fish scale design over here. And then the back of it changed as well. So we went from the number 78 Stanley over to the fancy schmancy Stanley number 78 design over there. And it's now 1910, or it's the decade of the 1910s. And I suspect that we have now moved to this style of lever cap screw. The lever cap has changed a little bit, but not a whole lot. And I'm going to go over some of those changes individually here after we get done talking about the bodies. But we've got the fish scales on the handle over here, of course, the patent date. And what I've always found interesting about this is that it was 1925, while this 1910 patent date was still on there, because they would have left it on there for 17 years. So in 1925, 15 years into that, they added the adjustment lever for raising and lowering the blade. And once that lever is added to raise and lower the blade, we don't see a lot of significant changes for the next several years. I mean, I would even go so far as to say decades. Of course, the patent date is going to drop off after 17 years, and then we go to just number 78, made in USA down there. Of course, still have the lever for raising and lowering the blade, still got the improved construction, still got the fish scales. All of that remains the same. We do go to just Stanley on the back versus having the ornate Stanley number 78 back there. And it really stays like this and stays consistent for a very, very long time. And as a side note, these were being made in other places. They were being made in Canada, and you would actually see, of course, made in CAN for Canada instead of USA. And they were also being made in England later, and that would also be annotated as such. And that is a very quick synopsis of the progression of the bodies and the major changes. There may have been some other minor changes that I didn't display, but for all intents and purposes, those were the major changes in the progression from the Type 1s through the much later ones. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and add one thing. In the 1960s, this would have gone blue, just like the Type 20s for the bench planes. In the 1960s, those were blue, and this is going to be really hard to see on camera, but for example, this is, you can't really tell that. This is an actual blue one there. It's a little easier to tell when you have something to compare it against. So this is going to be from that, what we consider the Type 20 era for the bench planes, or the 1960s. And now that I'm thinking about it, I've even seen one maroon one from the Cordovan period, so they did actually change accordingly. And now I'm just going to recap and talk about some of the individual parts that you're going to see on a number 78. This is one of the original fences. It's got the B casting. Whether the Type 1 had an S casting mark on the fence or not, I do not know. I've never seen an S casting fence. And as a matter of fact, if you have, send me a picture of it, or just let me know either in the chat here on YouTube or on Just Plain Fun, the parts division over on Facebook, because I'm kind of curious about that. And then once the B casting drops off, we have virtually the same fence. It's identical, just without the B casting mark. And then later on, it gets a little beef up in the form of this little add-on, or beef up on the corner there with the hole in it. And the top of it is a little bit different as well, as far as the spacing on these ridges right here. And you also have a casting mark at it. And this is much, much later. And I'm reluctant to try to put a specific date on these, but just know that that's the progression there from the B casting to the B casting dropping off, and then later having that beef up on the corner there. As for the lever caps, we talked about how at the beginning they would have had this style of lever cap screw, and then what I suspect was in 1905 or around there, it would have gone to this style right here, and then later on it would have gone to what we commonly see on the majority of 78s. And keep in mind, I mean, there were millions and millions of these made, but this is going to be the most common one that you're going to see. For the lever caps themselves, I don't have an S casting one, and maybe they had an S casting, maybe they didn't, but this is going to be a B casting lever cap right here. And then just like on the other one, the B, or just like on the fences rather, the B drops off, but we have virtually the same or identical style of lever cap there. And what I suspect happened was next they added this strengthening rib right here, or can I use the term beef up again? And then later it actually got widened and it went as wide as the blade. And so prior to that, this was a little bit shy of the full width of the blade, as were these really, really early ones. But later on, it went to the full 1.5 inches that you see for the later lever caps. And along those same lines, you can see where this is fatter up here at the top, whereas this is more narrow. And if you look at the blades, it actually coincides with that as well. So the top of this one is going to be about the same width as the top of that blade or iron. And same thing here. You can see where the iron narrows on the later style there, but it matches with the lever cap. As for the depth stops, if you have a B casting plane, you should have a B casting depth stop if you want it to be all original. Most of the ones that came out of that foundry would have had a B casting, as far as I know. And if you know different, or if you've seen different in writing, by all means, share that with me. But the main thing that I want you to know about these depth stops is there was one change. I don't know how significant you would call it, and I think I've covered this in another video as well. But this little groove right here, or cutout where it's been taken away, this was an improvement. And I wish I could tell you exactly when that happened, but the reason why they did that was to make room for the blade, because a lot of people, when they're using the 78, they like to have the blade extend just ever so slightly past this inside corner right there. And what having that groove does is it allows space for that blade to extend a little bit. And here's a visual of what that would actually look like. And just as a point to make here, the blade is actually designed to be slightly wider. You can see where the point kind of extends a little bit past it. And that is by design. That's the way Stanley intended it to be. Sometimes you'll run into these where somebody didn't like that and they shave the edge of the blade down, but a good solid 78 iron is going to be ever so slightly wider than the body itself. Before we go on and talk about the irons and the different logos or trademarks there, I just want to throw this out there. I don't think I mentioned this in either of my first two videos. These spurs are identical to the ones on the number 45 and the late model 55s. And I always like to mention that type of thing for compatibility purposes. So if you were short a spur for your number 45, you could grab the one off of your 78, especially if it's already sharp. There's one less thing that you'd have to do. The screw itself won't work. The screw itself is actually longer on the 78, but the spur is identical to what's on the 45. And I think we've now covered everything. We talked about the body, the fences, the depth stops, the lever caps, the lever cap screws, etc. And let me go ahead and just close out with talking about the irons. And I did mention these a little bit at the beginning. Got this type 1. That's really hard to see unless I hold it at just the right angle. And then the next ones that came are going to be these two right here. This would be considered the J logo if we're talking in terms of bench planes. And from there, and this is why I said that I suspected it was 1907, because this is the same or very, very similar to the T logo that we see on the bench planes, which we know came out in 1907. And Stanley was pretty good about being consistent across different tools or different planes to use the same or very, very similar trademarks or logos, whatever term you prefer. And this being the V logo right here, we know was, 1912 to 1919. And you will find conflicting data on that. Some places are going to say 1910 to 1918. I've also seen 1912 to 1919. Whichever one is correct, to be honest with you, I don't really know, but I've seen both. And then for the Sweetheart irons, I have a whole nother video where I talk about the actual Sweetheart irons and the progression there. And you can see where this one, and if you've watched the other video, you know that you've got the X, the Y, and the AA. And just to recap really, really quick, these are both going to be considered Y logos because the SW and the heart there is encroaching up into the Stanley rectangle there, and there's no New Britain, Connecticut, so that we know that it's not the X logo. And then the AA, you can see the SW and the heart is all the way down below the rectangle. And what's significant about this particular run with regards to the 78 is because if you remember in 1925 was when they added the blade adjustment lever, and lo and behold, there you go. So early 20s is going to be what we now consider the Y logo. And then after 1925, they would have already switched over to the AA. And that explains why you've got the ridges to correspond with the blade adjustment lever. And by 1936, we know that we've now moved on to the BB logo. And it's, of course, still going to have the grooves on the back. But this is going to be your BB that you're going to see from 1936 and on. And that should do it. I hope you all got some out of that. I hope you learned something new. Despite all of my speculation and my educated guesses. And if you have any questions or if you want to refute anything, maybe you've got a good source, please do share that with me. And honestly, I will reshoot this entire video if I have some more definitive answers on some of the things that I was speculating on. I'm happy to do that. So whether it's here in the YouTube comments or over on Facebook or just plain fun, the parts division, I look forward to hearing from all of y'all. And as always, thanks for watching my stuff.